My name is Peggy LaPointe, and this is Talking Trash, a Green Tips podcast, a chance for me to dive into the world of environmental issues by talking to people in business, government, and nonprofits, folks knee-deep in the field of sustainability. Episode 60 features Lake Thelen, education specialist at Metro. You've been with Metro this is going on your third year, right? 2017 you started?
Yes, absolutely. This is my third school year.
And you are born and raised in Portland.
I am.
But have like a fascinating background. And, you know, it's always interesting to hear how people get to the position that they do, because it's not a straight line like it used to be, or like it seems like it used to be. But people have varied backgrounds that contribute to what they have. And so I'm going to list off some of yours, and I know I'm not going to hit all of them because these are probably the highlights. But so you studied tropical biology in Costa Rica, led nature camps in Colorado, taught high school chemistry in Dominican Republic, and then worked on a restoration team. You were a technician in a Chilean ecosystems.
Yes, I was. Did all that.
Right. That's pretty cool. So, of course, the question is, how did you get to where you are? Is it, you know?
Yeah, and I was thinking about what you said about sometimes paths are a little circuitous, or they don't appear to be in a direct line. And I would say that's true for me as well, although there is kind of a thread, I think, that's been through all of that, which has been really fascinating. Like when I look back, it's all helped me and it's all been relevant to the things that are most important to me. But it's true. I mean, I did have the privilege of, I got a 4-year degree. I had some time to kind of think about what I wanted to do and have some exploration with my careers. But I think ending up at Metro has actually been really nice for me at this point in my life, because it's kind of a coming together of a lot of those different interests. I get to focus on environmental science and natural resources and conservation, but also a lot on people and outreach, and equity and justice.
And communication.
And communication, absolutely. So it's kind of a nice coming together of all of those different interests.
Where did you study and what did you study?
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in Portland. And then when I graduated from high school, I just went up to Washington State, to University of Puget Sound, and I got a biology degree.
Nice.
And that was when I got to do the studying in Costa Rica.
Okay.
Yeah.
What high school?
I went to Cleveland High School in Southeast Portland, and I am currently planning my 10-year high school reunion.
So it's probably pretty, because I would imagine you, and we'll get to more of this later, but you probably go back into the school for these education days, and it's probably pretty weird.
It's weird. Yeah, I've actually been to Cleveland High School, and I should tell you, I know you've observed me at Mount Tabor Middle School. I also went to Mount Tabor Middle School.
Oh, did you really?
And I've worked quite a bit with their teachers there in the 6th and 7th grade program. And so it's always very interesting to walk through the halls, smell this. There's something so particular about like the cafeteria smells and checking in the office. I feel in a way like I kind of never left.
Yeah, that's
which is both
fun.
There's positives and negatives to that.
Right. Especially middle school, being the parent of a middle schooler and a high schooler. Yeah, awkward.
Yeah, it's a time not a lot of people want to go back to.
Gosh. And we'll get to my shadowing of you in a moment, but let's sort of give an overview of who and what the education team is at Metro, because there's about a half a dozen of you folks.
Yeah, and growing. And I will say, like you mentioned at the beginning, I'm pretty new to the program. I'm in my 3rd year. But the education program itself within the solid waste and recycling team has been in place for, I think, over 20 years. And for a long time, they had temporary staff doing outreach education in schools. But we've since been able to grow the team with more permanent staff and do some more in-depth kind of curriculum development. So right now, our kind of core team does classroom education. That's free programs for teachers across the metro region, so Clackamas, Washington, Multnomah counties. We have an elementary program, and then we also have a middle and high school program, which is the team that I work on. But in addition to that, we also have like a healthy homes and toxics reduction outreach team.
Right.
We have a lot of other community education programs that are growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe I saw this on your page. You put something about what you like about it is because you get a chance to engage with youth and community around climate change, resource consumption, racial equity, and how to work together to improve systems. And I thought that was just a ideal overview. So briefly, because I know that you are the middle school and high school focused. But briefly, let's give me an overview of the elementary school programs, because there are a couple of them.
There are, yeah. And at this point in time, they actually have a wider variety of programs in elementary than we do in middle and high school. But their topics range. One of their most popular is a composting with worms program, when they actually bring in worm bins. Yeah. The kids get to play, touch the worms. They do some observations of the compost. They have some neat kind of microscopes they can look at and really do some in-depth observations. They have a kind of a resources and recycling presentation, thinking about natural resources. An eco footprint focus, thinking about how the stuff we use comes from the earth and has an impact both on the earth and on people. They do a packaging focused presentation about kind of marketing and how packaging can signal different things, and kind of about conscious consumption. And they also have some kind of a bugged by pesticides or a toxics free program, thinking about
Investigation.
I love that. There you go.
Yeah, yes. The title.
Yeah, and they're very creative. They do a great job targeting the material to smaller, younger minds.
Yeah,
who are very curious and have a lot of really awesome questions
and have a lot of sway with their parents.
Yes.
So tell me as much as you can, because again, I know that this is not your focus, but for those who might think this is too much of a deep dive for young minds. Yeah. Tell me why this is important, because kids aren't going out and buying the stuff, but I'm a parent and I know that kids will make suggestions, shall we say, at the grocery store.
Sometimes soft suggestions, sometimes forceful suggestion. No, that's a great point. And again, I can speak more to middle and high school age, but I think across the board, just exposing young people to some of this information can be so important, because we do live in a world that's really overwhelmingly based on consumerism in a lot of ways. A lot of the messaging that they're getting, a lot of the kind of dominant ways of doing things really are very extractive and very focused on purchasing and getting things, and that's a path to happiness. But a lot of, unless you talk about it or unless somebody goes out of their way to have a conversation, you don't always get to see what's underneath that and what's behind it, and the impact that it can have.
And they're being targeted. It's not the parents that are being targeted, it's them. And so when they understand, how and why these messages by the advertisers are put out there, they start to think more critically. Maybe not complex critical thinking, but still some critical thinking going on.
Absolutely. And I think I've spoken a little bit with our elementary team, and there's a hesitation sometimes from some folks of like, do we want to bring up all this terrible information about how hard the system is and how much damage is being caused sometimes by extraction of resources? And I agree. I think there's a way to do it that's gentle, and kids are naturally so curious, and they also, I think, have an innate sense of justice and of fairness. And when they can kind of lay out and just see the pieces, they can ask that question for themselves, like, why is it like this?
Right.
And what would it look like if we made it better?
And come to their own conclusions. You
Absolutely.
present the facts in a way that's understandable and digestible for an elementary school kid, and they start to, like you said, piece it together and come to their own conclusions and ask great questions. So the middle and high school programs, give me an overview of what goes on there.
Yeah, so at this point in time, we have just two main programs that we do. They're focused on, there's a climate change focus program, and then there's a kind of a recycling and reuse program. And we schedule with our teachers pretty much all in the fall, and we book up through the year. There are two of us doing outreach, so every day of the week, one person's out. We'll visit a classroom. We can do anywhere between 1 and 5 or 6 presentations in a day. So there is some repetition there. There's you have to be very precise with your times. A lot of times, especially with the bell schedules, we can have anywhere from 41 minutes to an hour and a half to do these presentations. And I think I said at the beginning, they're all free for schools. And we have a lot of teachers who come back year after year, or who we've worked with in the past and built good relationships with. And those programs run pretty much from September to June. And we have a couple special programs going on right now that I can speak to more now or later.
Well, let's do it now.
Yeah. So my coworker, his name's Ken, who has been in the program longer than I have. He a couple years ago started a pilot program with Centennial High School and their AP environmental science classes to do kind of a peer-to-peer climate change education program where in the spring, after these students have studied environmental science all year, taken their exam, They have this little window of time in May where he's been going in to work with them to develop their own climate change presentations, kind of with their own elements to them, whatever angle they want to take, and then actually connecting with local 6th grade classrooms to teach their presentations in the 6th grade classrooms. And there's a lot of really strong benefits to that peer-to-peer model. And he's had great success with it. I think they're entering this will be their 3rd year that they're going to be doing that program in 2020. Is it just
Centennial?
It is at this point just Centennial. We have some opportunities to extend it. I have some other teachers I'm communicating with. For this year, it's just focused on Centennial, though.
Because I'm trying to think, my junior, who obviously will be a senior next year, I think he signed up for AP Environmental Science. And that's at Franklin High School, though.
At Franklin, yeah.
Yeah, so I was kind of curious about that. And then what's the other program? Did you mention
the other program? That's the main one right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another thing that I saw, and this was definitely on the Metro website. And I want to ask you about this. It says the team is shifting the focus of programs away from individual behaviors towards community actions, providing students with meaningful solutions that match the scale of the big issues we're facing with climate change. So tell me why that intentional shift is going on.
Yeah. And I'm going to be thinking out loud while I answer your question, because I think there's a lot of reasons there. The first one, I don't know if this is the most direct one, but just because it's at the front of my mind and I think very important, is our team has really done a lot of work to bring a stronger racial equity focus into our programs. And that's something that not a lot of us came with a background. A lot of people on our team are white. A lot of us come from kind of a middle class background that's very kind of mainstream environmentalist culture.
Right.
And I know I'm using a lot of kind of jargony words right now. I know it's probably will require some research for people listening. But there was some big gaps that as we started to do more equity focused trainings, we did some awesome work with local organizations that have given us just really incredible coaching to start to see how our programs aren't necessarily reaching our whole audience.
Yeah.
And part of that has to do with choice and kind of a lot of times with economic privilege and cultural privilege, racial privilege. A lot of our students, maybe we're talking about recycling in the classroom, but they live in an apartment building that doesn't have good access to recycling services. Or maybe we're talking about pesticides and healthy gardening, and again, they don't have a yard. Maybe it's a family that's really economically stretched and you can't buy in bulk ahead of time, right? You have to buy the small packages, so you're using more packaging. There's a lot of stuff like that that gets missed if you're not if you haven't had to look for it before.
Right.
And so we've really done a lot of work to make our actions less about here's this morally good green environmental thing that I'm going to do all by myself and save the earth, and how can I work with my community and the resources that I have to make a difference. And that's coupled with the reality that if we're really realistic, a lot of these big issues that we're facing are not going to be fixed by like just me riding my bike to work every day. That's so important,
right?
Especially because of the culture it builds,
right?
Absolutely, but we need bigger action. We need bigger changes in the way that we make our stuff and the way that we run our systems.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. I think we don't want to be giving youth the message that the way that they're responsible for all of the issues in our system.
That's a heavy burden.
That's a heavy burden. And it also creates a funny hierarchy of like one student might have the freedom, maybe they have access to all the food they need so they can voluntarily eat less meat. That's not an option for a lot of our students. And I don't want to create any kind of a hierarchy or moral goodness where somebody feels really good because they think they're doing everything perfect, and this other student's like, hey, I care too. I want to make a difference, but the ways that I can make a difference are different.
Yeah, they look different for every person.
They look different for every person. And I think really valuing those strengths appears in that kind of community action model.
Yeah. And so can you give me examples of community action?
Yes, I can. And I will say with the caveat that our team is learning.
Right.
Our team is learning because a lot of us, this program, as I said, it's a long-standing program and there's really incredible work been put into it. And I think it's in a transition right now. A lot of the work, I'll say in our climate change presentation, which we'll get into in a minute, we've incorporated a really fantastic activity created actually by 2 local teachers at Lincoln High School. It's kind of a climate change mixer activity, and the students get to meet various climate activists.
Yeah.
So anywhere from direct action of paddling canoes out into a harbor to block coal ships, which really is just an awareness building kind of an issue to create news about distribution of coal around the world, to student divestment campaigns where they're asking universities to stop putting money into fossil fuel companies and taking $14 billion away from a big industry. Those kind of larger things that are not just, I'll use the bike example again. Like I rode my bike to work one day a week. That's important. And like, that's not going to fix this giant problem.
Right.
Some of those kind of larger things.
Well, it's interesting because I just had a conversation with Briarstone at PCC and about their sustainability efforts and initiatives and the divestment that was student-led. Yes. And so it's like, what I love is that students are getting age-appropriate messages to build on their, if they choose to, build on their education to then, continue to make bigger and bigger differences so that when they get to a PCC or a PSU or, even in their community, they have the tools to go, what can I do to make a difference and to bring my community along? Yeah. So, I like that a lot. Let's talk about the program because I had a chance to shadow you for one day, and it was this day 2 of the presentation for middle schools. I got to go to Mount Tabor, where my son gave me strict rules not to look or speak to any of his friends should I encounter them in the hallway. And I did a pretty good job of that.
Well done.
But it was really fascinating because I got to sit in the back of the room and listen to 7th graders talk about these things. And I'm going to say this, and then we'll start, and then you can tell me about the program. But right off the bat, I don't remember the question that you asked or even how it came up. But one student made a particular comment that sort of stuck with me about, he was discouraged.
Yes.
And I think he felt, and I'm guessing just from his words, it felt overwhelming to him that dealing with climate anxiety.
Yes.
From the mouth of a 7th grader.
And we see that a lot.
I bet.
I think that's, if we focus on climate change as a topic specifically, I think it's something that can be stressful for everybody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And then when I think particularly about adolescence, when you're in that 11, 12, 13 range, you're doing so much self-forming. You've got all kinds of crazy stuff happening in your body. You're trying to envision what your future is going to look like. And all the adults are walking around saying the world's going to end.
Right.
And that's really hard.
It can be crushing.
It can be really crushing.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm speaking partly from my own experience. We were talking earlier about going to Cleveland High School. That was the first time I really learned about climate change, was in an environmental science class at Cleveland.
Right.
We watched An Inconvenient Truth. It was all the really kind of like basic climate education that a lot of people in our community might have gotten before. But I just had this moment of like, wait, this seems like a really big deal. Why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And it was a really big disconnect for me to think about what my next steps would be. And I had a hard time imagining just having a normal career, going on with life, buying a house, opportunities that I had the privilege might have been available to me, but I couldn't figure out how I could reconcile that with this knowledge that I had about these huge things that were happening in the world. And I think I see that as well in a lot of our youth today.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Tell me, let's start off with the program. So I got to go to day 2. Day 1 looks like what for middle school and high schoolers?
Yes. So, and it's worth mentioning, it is overall the same program for middle and high school. We use the same presentation and the same kind of basic note-taking materials, but we do go kind of to a different depth, and the questions are different, of course. But day 1 focuses really a lot just on the background of what climate change is. We look at some visuals, some graphs. We talk about temperature increase. We talk about greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, some of the patterns that are observed and some of the impacts around the world. And we also really make a strong connection to consumption So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're in the solid waste and recycling team, and there's a really strong connection there between the stuff that we're buying and using and throwing away and climate change. Right. For a lot of reasons. So we do kind of an interactive concept map where students get to think about how energy used in factories and fossil fuels for transportation and huge amounts of trash going to a landfill releasing methane gas can really be connected to this issue. And we watch a series of videos that kind of follow it's a NPR Planet Money project. Series of videos, I think from 2013, where they follow the making of a t-shirt. Yeah. And we kind of follow the production path all the way upstream down to disposal.
Which is definitely a thing that middle schools and high schoolers can sort of wrap their heads around, because they're at the age where they have a little bit of disposable income and they might want to buy a cool, garment, and it's not like a car or a house or something big. And so what's sort of the reaction to that? What kind of interaction do you get from students?
I think it depends.
Yeah.
Because the metro region is so big. We go to so many different schools and communities. But overall, I think students get it. Like it is something you can kind of use your innate knowledge as a consumer and living in the system we have to be like, oh, I can see how when stuff's being made and sold in stores, it has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And honestly, I think for adults, that's a big learning moment too, to think like, I have this t-shirt in my hands, I have this water bottle, I have this phone. Where the heck did it come from before it got to me? And that whole path has a pretty big impact. So even our teachers, they sometimes have moments of, they have an aha moment as well. But no, I think students get it. And I think depending on the community I'm in, sometimes students are already all about that. Like they'll give me examples of the way that they like to go thrift shopping, if that's an option for them. Again, for some students, that's not an option. All their clothes, for a lot of us, maybe we don't have a ton of money to buy new clothes. So in that case, it's a lot of just encouraging, like, you are already doing something that's so fantastic. I know sometimes it can feel frustrating, like I can't go out and buy the newest thing every time, but look at this big system, that's a benefit.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I was looking at the presentation, how do we get here, vision for the future, making a difference, and the breakdown. And that's how you sort of wrap everything around. The second day, I got to listen in, sat in the back of the room and watch the students. First of all, I was honestly, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting next to me, I was impressed with how you interacted with the kids. And that was before I realized that you had, been a high school teacher in the Dominican Republic. But you had them interested, and you had them, because seventh grade, like I said, I'm a parent of an 8th grader and a high schooler, and man, middle schoolers are tough because they're stingy with their attention. But
That's a good way to say it.
Yes, you had their attention, and they were engaged.
Yeah, and I have to give a huge shout out to the teacher whose classroom we were in. I know it takes a lot of work for classroom teachers, absolutely, to build up that relationship. She
was my older son's 7th grade teacher, and I love her because she is so dang smart and dynamic.
Yes, and that goes such a long way again with 7th grade, and with everybody wants something interesting to listen to, but especially when you're in middle school, you're stuck there all day.
Yes,
like need to be entertaining. Right. And I would say a shout out to my coworker Ken Pitts, who I mentioned already. He was a high school teacher for over 30 years. Nice. He has great classroom management skills, and I did a lot of shadowing of him when I first started. Yeah. So I think my background coupled with getting trained by Ken and watching our other educators has really helped me get a better feel for how to be interesting. Right. But I'm not always interesting. Like,
no, none of us
I go in classes and sometimes it's a flop, and I'm so sorry for it. But yeah.
Yep, exactly. And it was my older son, Michael, who Ken came into his classroom.
Okay.
And I didn't know that was happening at the time. And he came home and he's like, Mom, someone from Metro was in my class. And he talked about it, and he really liked it a lot. So you go through a number of things when I was there, and there were a lot of things. I wrote notes because I was following along, and I thought it was pretty cool. You talk about drawdown. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
the drawdown part of the presentation.
Absolutely. And Drawdown may be a research project that some of your listeners are familiar with. I believe it came out in 2017. It's a program led by Paul Hawken, but with an international team of researchers. And their goal was basically to do some research and investigation about what some of the most impactful things that could be done around the world to reduce greenhouse gases, specifically focused on carbon dioxide. But there are some that are methane as well. So they did a lot of research. They interviewed a lot of people living in different ways around the world. They basically came up with this list. It's 80 things long. They have a website, drawdown.org. You can look at all the solutions summarized, ranked by their impact, so which one basically reduces the most greenhouse gases. I actually had the opportunity to hear Paul Hawken speak a couple years ago, and it was interesting to hear him say, we didn't create this resource as like a guide, or it's not intended to be prescriptive.
Right.
And some of the things on the list I would argue are a little controversial. Like number 20 on the list of 80 is nuclear, which has a lot of negative, really significant negative impacts.
Right.
And my impression is when they did the project, they weren't saying, these are all the things we have to do, but they did a ton of math, both about the cost to implement and the net benefit in CO2 reduction. And they just kind of wanted to, it was a curiosity. Like, would this thing cause a big enough impact to get us back down toward 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide to reduce some of the warming and negative effects of climate change? So in our class, we have pulled 8 solutions off of the list that are kind of hiding from the list. And what we ask students and groups to do is to try to rank them. So guess what order they go in, which one would be toward the top, having the biggest reduction in CO2, and then which would be down toward the bottom. So they work together in groups to try to kind of figure that out, and I'll usually ask them what they thought was most important. And the results are usually a little surprising.
Yes, they are. So you have them fill out what number 3, 4, 6, 26, 33, 37, 46, and 55 are. And it was interesting to see how they ranked them. But the choices that they had were things like recycling at home and public transportation and eating a plant-based diet. And I don't know if this is the case with every single class, but I think everyone in this class was shocked at what number 6 was.
Yes.
And tell us what number 6.
So number 6 on the list, based on the research that the team did, was girls' education.
And that brought up an interesting conversation.
Number 6 starts a really interesting conversation because of how much research there is connecting access to education with just access to opportunity and choice in general.
Yeah.
And we really say, women are half the population of the whole world. And women make a lot of the choices about all the other things on the list, how they're managing the land they're living on, how they're getting around, what they're eating, how they're cooking, how they raise their kids
power
if they have kids.
Yes, absolutely. They have a lot of unacknowledged power.
Absolutely.
When it comes to climate change. So yeah, it was that. I loved the reaction of folks. Recycling at home did not come as high up as many of them thought it would.
Recycling at home is number 55 out of 80. Absolutely. Yeah. And I do use that as a conversation point sometimes.
Absolutely.
Like, I'll point it out. I hear people talk sometimes about recycling as a climate strategy. Recycling is really important, but there are so many other things that are higher on that list. And I think it kind of comes back to what we were saying at the beginning about community action.
Yeah.
Some of these are big changes about how we design our cities, about how we make our stuff, about how we get our energy.
Right.
And those aren't something that any one single one of us is responsible for, but we can all play a role in.
Yeah. And in case people were wondering, number 3 is reducing food waste. And I've talked about this a lot on Green Tips and such, is reducing food waste is a huge way that individuals can help lower CO2. Eating plant-based diet is number 4. We mentioned number 6, girls getting education, 26, driving an electric car, LED lights at 33, 37, public transportation, 46, saving water at home, and then 55, recycling. The other aspect of the program was when you were talking about activists and taking climate action. And this goes back, we kind of alluded to it earlier, about focusing more on community action versus individual action. So tell me about this exercise.
Absolutely. And again, I would give credit to Tim Swinehart and Matt Reed at Lincoln High School in Southwest Portland, who have done a lot of work to create some climate-focused activities that are really based also in racial justice, which is one thing that comes up with these activists. So this activity is an activity where each student receives a small profile. It has someone's name, their pronouns, it says where they're from, and then it has a short bit of information about them, what they're doing. They're all different people. They all have different backgrounds. Anywhere from, a youth in Australia who's boycotting school on Fridays to raise awareness about climate change, a middle school student who's creating murals about climate change to help teach her community. And students then get to kind of read and take some notes, and then it's their opportunity to take on the character for a moment and introduce themselves to others in the room and share a little bit about what they've learned. And once they have a chance to kind of have those conversations and get to know some people, we'll come back together and talk about it. We put up photos of everybody because they're all folks who are alive currently doing the things that got read about. So we'll talk and we'll ask questions. We'll highlight some of the different activities that are being done. And then we'll turn it back to the students. What are they good at? What's their talent? What would they do? What would be their thing? Like, are they an artist? Are they good at writing? Do they just have a loud voice and they could protest? Yeah,
that was a fun part. There was one aspect to this that blew me away, and that was when you played Amanda Gorman. She's a young poet laureate, and you played her poem. And I'm getting tears in my eyes right now. I'm getting choked up. It was so moving. I had to watch that. I've watched it a half a dozen times, and each time I get choked up and I get tears in my eyes and I catch something different. I'm going to post this because it was so powerful, her poem. And so why do you add this? I mean, obviously it gets a reaction, but.
Absolutely. And I'll say my coworker Ken was actually able to see Amanda in person. I think it was last year. She attended one of Al Gore's climate reality trainings that Ken was at in Los Angeles. So she read the poem in person. I believe she got a standing ovation.
Oh, absolutely.
From that whole room full of room full of people. So yeah, I do encourage people to give that poem a listen. You can see her perform it, which is really powerful. We chose it for a few reasons. And just to highlight this, one of the biggest reasons, she's a young activist of color. Right. And I think that representation of saying that there are all different kinds of people with all different backgrounds who care a lot about this. And one of the lines of the poem that chokes me up a little bit, she really makes the point, it's the obscure, it's the oppressed, it's the forgotten, it's the marginalized who are most impacted, who when the disaster's over, the storm ends, the water supply gets back in, those are the folks who are still left most impacted, who are still struggling the most
Puerto Rico.
To recover. Absolutely. And even within our own country as well. So that, I think, is a really powerful message. We start out the second day with that, and that's something we really wanted to highlight.
Yeah.
And also just the beauty of the poem and incorporating more art. Again, some of the feedback that we've gotten from our community advisors and people who have helped us develop this program is to incorporate more kind of ways of knowing into our presentations. It's really easy to get stuck on data and statistics and scientific measurements and graphs, and that's helpful. Yeah. That's really an important way of understanding the world. And also, that doesn't connect with everybody. No. So if I can get your attention with a really incredible poem, and that's the connection that helps you feel like you can go forward learning about the topic, then I'm all for that.
Right. And I have to say, I'm not someone who seeks out poetry.
Yeah.
At
there
all.
You go.
At all. And so, again, with middle schoolers and high schoolers, well, anybody who, might go, poems are, whatever. It's to hear it spoken by Amanda is powerful. And you're right, reaching folks through different ways. And art already is emotional and powerful. And so that's just another way to capture attention. So how do you wrap up the 2 days then?
Yeah, and so at the end of the 2 days, they've had a chance to kind of do the drawdown and do the mixer activity. We ask students to make a pledge. And that has morphed. I will say we have tried to keep the pledge as we also focus on moving from individual to collective action. So the pledge is what we call a 6% pledge, and it comes actually from some awesome calculations that our team did of what actually would represent a 6% CO2 emissions reduction per year per person. And we try to frame it in terms of the big goals we have as a society, which would be being 100% carbon neutral, not burning a ton of these dirty fossil fuels, removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. That's a huge goal. And it's not a goal we're going to reach tomorrow morning. Right. But we start to talk about, what if you do a little tiny bit every year, like 6% a year for 10 years, you're at 60% by 2030. We're over halfway to our goal.
Right.
So we let students practice it. We talk about it as an individual action that they can practice, but we also try to communicate that larger framework. So we have several examples that we let students choose. One example would be wearing a couple outfits of used clothing. Again, for students who are buying most of their clothes new, a small reduction would represent a reduction in CO2 impact based on what they've already learned about consumption and the t-shirt videos. We talk about eating one less hamburger a week, or having maybe a meat-free day a week, which would be a reduction based on kind of the average high amount of beef that folks are eating in the U.S. on average. And also about giving 3 experiences as gifts instead of stuff. That's something I talked about a lot with my family this past year. So instead of like buying a thing in the store that was made new, came from far away, had an impact, share an experience with somebody. Go to the zoo, go on a bike ride, cook them a delicious meal, make them a piece of art. Whatever your talent is that you can share to make a memory also represents a reduction in your impact. I also let students choose their own pledges. We focus back on all the activists we've seen, on all the drawdown solutions, and I really try to remind students they know themselves better than I do. I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't want to be telling them, especially as somebody who's working for a local government, that's not a good relationship for a lot of the communities that we go into. I'm a white woman. I work for the government. Me coming in and saying like, eat less meat, drive an electric car is not going to, doesn't connect, and it doesn't go over well, and it's just not very kind.
Right. And let's face it, kids have enough adults telling them what to do.
They sure do. I totally agree with you.
And they don't respect it then.
Yes. And honestly, I tell students that one of the most powerful pledges at this point can just be picking an adult in your life and telling them why this issue is important. One of the activities we do on that second day as well is just a little bit of a reflection, like a quiet reflection activity where students get to write or draw what their connection is, why they want something to be done about it, and just sharing that can be huge. Based on kind of what you said at the beginning, youth can have a huge impact on the adults, and I just want to put a call out there to all the adults, like, we need to step up. Like, I think it's really easy to look down at youth, and I hear a lot like, oh, they're the next generation, they're the future, they're going to solve these problems. And yes, and it's really easy to pass that responsibility off.
A huge burden.
And just thinking about who has the most resources in this situation, who has the most opportunity and education and money and time and chance. Power. It comes down to power. Absolutely. So again, it's a collective effort, but I think we really owe it to our young people who are really trying to figure this out.
And they're smart.
Yes.
They are smart. I don't think we give them sometimes enough credit, and we, generally speaking, I don't want to say everybody, but we don't give kids enough credit. They are pretty deep thinkers.
Absolutely. I talk to smart people every single day at the schools I'm at. And I love the conversations I have, and I love that it's different everywhere I go. And I can see the passion there. What
have you learned from some of them?
Oh my gosh.
I know. Put you on the spot here.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a specific answer to that. I think the biggest thing that's coming to my mind when you ask me that is just about how it's just a reminder. I think I knew this, but getting the consistent reminder of just how smart they all are, how unique they all are. Like, all of them are coming from a different background and a different home life. And I think it's a good lesson for me to always remember that, because it's easy to say, I'm going to create this educational program and I'm going to go in and I'm going to give it to them because I have all the information. But it's an exercise for me to be more humble. Teens will make you humble. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Every day they will humble you in ways that you had no idea could happen.
Absolutely. And really also, I don't know if this is a lesson, but the point of me being there is really for them. Like, I have things to learn, and also, like, I think just being, I think anytime I can just be an adult who cares, who's nice, I think that's important. I don't know if any youth want to correct me, they can, but I think that's lacking sometimes. It's easy to grow up and just exist in a different world and forget that when you're a kid, like, you can think and you can see and you can hear and you know what's going on. You may have had less access to certain information, but there's I think it's easy to like kind of blow kids off sometimes.
Right. Well, and the thing about the class, at least the one that I was able to view, is that you're not just talking to them. You're having conversations with them, and they are leading the discussions in many ways. And so, it's an adult in the room who's listening to them and also helping them think of things in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so that's different from just a lecture. And so much more engaging for anyone. And I try, and again, our program has really tried at that. Yeah. It's something I think we're all trying to learn. I don't know how, this isn't as connected to, this is more about child development than about trash. But I think that's something I'll say for myself as a teacher, as somebody who doesn't have a ton of years of classroom experience, but I have a lot of informal experience. I struggle with wanting to offer those opportunities to share and to kind of be more of a facilitator, with the reality that a lot of our school systems are pretty, I'm not talking about specific teachers, but the kind of traditional mode of Western education can be pretty domineering and pretty lecture-based and pretty, some of the like student management techniques that a lot of students are used to are yelling, are controlling. And so it's a balance I'm still trying to strike. Because when I'm too nice and I'm too conversational, a lot of students are uninterested. Like it does require kind of a mix where I still have to figure out how to lead the conversation, but without being domineering. No, that's absolutely true. So I want to wrap this up with a couple of things. One, for teachers who want to have the education team come in, how do they sort of get to you guys?
Yeah, so teachers can find us in two ways. They can write an email directly to our programs, which is youthprograms@oregonmetro.gov. There's also a link on our website to learn more about our program. The website's just oregonmetro.gov. You go under Tools for Partners and Education. It comes up in the top menu. You can also search our site for recycling education. Yeah. Well, usually a keyword will get you there.
Go ahead.
I will say we do all of our scheduling in the fall.
Yeah.
So teachers can put an interest now, but we do kind of a scheduling waves that starts in the end of August, and it does fill up. So if teachers are interested, that would be something to
start planning for next year.
Planning for. Absolutely.
Well, there's also another thing. There are curriculum resources and educational materials. So, for instance, if somebody wanted to do something, a teacher, an educator wanted to do something now in the classroom, they could borrow this like a library, borrow these educational tools.
Yeah, and I will say my coworker, Jamie Rapaski, has done a lot of great work creating our educational kits. Mm-hmm. So both for elementary teachers and middle and high school teachers, these are actually loanable materials.
Yeah, there's 7 of them.
Absolutely, and there's information about those on our website as well. One of the kits is climate change. So if somebody wanted to lead a similar lesson to what we were just describing, they could absolutely do that. All the materials are there. There's a lesson plan. And that is not just for classroom teachers too. That might be for homeschool groups, sometimes for after school groups. We can really be flexible, or you can be flexible with how you want to use the materials. Yeah,
there's a recycle or not kit. There's composting with worms, resource connections, investigations, and bugged by pesticides. Enough Already, which is about
the ecological footprint
and climate change. And then I really like this one, the Plan, Shop, and Chop, which is about meal planning and food waste and that sort of thing. So these are kits that folks can rent out. That's fantastic. Well, Lake, thank you. Thank you for letting me job shadow you.
Yes.
Because it was
great to have you there.
I learned a lot, and it was just, again, I might have 2 teenagers at home, but they don't always talk to me about these things. They don't want to sit down and have a conversation with me about this. So it was great to be able to eavesdrop into the minds of these middle schoolers and hear what they had to say. Thanks for coming in today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me for my conversation with Lake Thelen, Education Specialist at Metro. If you've missed any of the previous podcasts, you can find them at our website at KINK.FM. Be sure to like and subscribe to Talking Trash, a Green Tips podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you're listening. Talking Trash is a podcast series featuring people in business, government, and nonprofits, and sometimes just regular folks in the Portland area and around Oregon who are having an impact in the world of sustainability.